Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning, brothers and sisters. My name is Vivin Molla, and our guest name is Mr. Shrestha, and he'll be introducing himself to all of us.
Good morning, audience. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, good night. I am Mr. Shrestha. I am a history fanatic, and I'm here to explain to you, debate about, and talk with Mr. Vivin Molla on feudalism, which was a system that was in place in Europe during the Middle Ages. Thank you, Mr. Vivin.
As Mr. Shrestha said, we'll be discussing about feudalism. Now, of course, Mr. Shrestha is a more intelligent person than me in terms of history, and he knows a lot more subject matter than I do. But for now, for feudalism, I'll be taking my ideas from this book. It's called Aspects of World History. So, let's start. 10 minutes of discussion. Would you please set the timer, Mr. Shrestha?
Yes, Mr. Vivin, I've set the timer.
Okay, so now we are both unmuted. Now we are ready to discuss. So,
May
what
I
is
present my
feudalism?
points?
Sure, Mr. Shrestha.
Feudalism was a dominant social, political, and economic system in Europe during the Middle Ages. So, the Middle Age is a time span from the 9th to the 15th century AD. That AD. This is after the fall of the Roman. This takes place after the fall of the Roman Empire, when Europe was broken down into pieces and had little to no central authority. That means Europe was complete anarchy at this time. This system was based on land ownership, military service, and personal loyalty. Thank you, Mr. Vivian.
Okay, so I understand that. And it's very interesting to see that type of system because I read that it built a lot of connection and trust and it built order in the society at that time. So could you please add me up on this one?
Mr. Vivian, may I start by explaining the basis of feudalism in medieval Europe?
Sure.
So, feudalism, at its simplest form, it was a pyramid structure with the king at the top, followed by lords, vassals, and peasants at the bottom. At its core, feudalism was a series of reciprocal obligations. King granted large territories to noble lords, basically landlords, in exchange for their military support and loyalty. The lords, in turn, granted portion of their lands to vassals, who were often knights, lesser nobles, or lesser rich men, in exchange for military service. At the bottom were the peasants and the serfs, who worked hard in exchange for protection from their lords. So basically, the king was the ruler of the entire system in feudalism, and the king's keys to power were the lords. The king granted land to the lords for their military service, protecting his kingdom and the king himself, um, along with um, along with their loyalty. And the lords, in turn, granted portions of the land to vassals who were knights or lesser nobles. These vassals generally granted them military service. Basically, they were soldiers or the army men of that time that allowed the lords to build up armies. And after that, there were peasants and serfs who worked in the land in exchange for getting protected by the lords and their armies. Thank you.
So I had one question in my mind. Could the king directly order the peasants, like from the top to the bottom, to directly join his army? Like in the situation of a war or some other catastrophe? Could he directly order them to be his soldiers or no?
So, in feudalism, the king actually did not have complete power over the vassals. You made a little mistake there. The peasants did not used to fight in war. The vassals did.
Oh, okay.
the vassals did, and the king actually did not have direct power over the vassals. The king had the king got loyalty from lords in exchange for land, and the lords got loyalty from the vassals in exchange for smaller portions of land. And the king ordered the king ordered the lords who were loyal to the king to get the vassals ready for war, and the vassals fought in said war on behalf of the kingdom and the king.
I see. Interesting system here. It's like a pyramid scheme that you talked about earlier. Now, you talk about vassals. Was there any sort of like coronation for the vassals? Was it fancy, just like the coronation of the king?
Uh, I think this gives a way for me to explain the entire structure in depth of feudalism.
Sure, go ahead.
So first was the king. The king theoretically owned all the land in the kingdom, but granted large portions of land called fiefs to nobles in exchange for loyalty and military service. This decentralization allowed kings to maintain control over vast territories without ruling them. Now, below the kings were vassals and lords. Lords and vassals. Lords were also known as barons, were powerful nobles who controlled the land granted by the king in exchange for land. They owed other they owed military service and other obligations to the monarch. Vassals were those who received lands from the lords. In return, they have to provide military service in form of knights or serve in other ways such as providing financial or material support. This system called hierarchy of land ownership and obligations wasn't just about military service. It was more about loyalty. Loyalty created a web of relations that helped maintain order. And at the bottom of the pyramid are peasants and serfs. Uh, they worked the land. Serfs weren't slaves. They were bound to the land and had limited rights, but they were given protection and shelter in return for their labor. They had little freedom, and they could not leave the land they worked without the Lord's permission, and had to give a portion of their harvest to the Lord in exchange for protection. Although the living conditions were harsh, feudalism provided some stability during turbulent times. And now, last, I would like to discuss the role of the church in feudalism. The Catholic Church played a central role in feudal society. They influenced both religious, political, social, and economic affairs. The church owned vast amount of land and was a major player in feudal transactions. Religious leaders were often advisors to the king or held some position that gave them some key or power in the ruling system. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that information with us. Indeed, the feudalism system was a unique one in all of history. And I'd like to emphasize what you said. Serfs were not slaves, but their condition was no better than slaves, right?
Yes,
So what they were bound to the land they were working for.
yes, they were bound to the land they were working for, but they could leave the land they were working in with permission from their lords.
But if they tried to escape it, they would receive severe punishment.
That is true. But
So,
unlike uh, but unlike the concept of slaves, limited. They actually had limited rights.
and slaves had none.
Slaves had none.
I see.
The the practice of these kinds of slaves did not start until the late Middle Ages.
So what? Did feudalism system come before the slavery system, or did slavery system come after the feudalism?
As far as I have read, the feudalism system was before the slavery system.
Okay, then what are the slaves? What are the slavery system in like ancient Rome and Egypt and Mesopotamia?
Uh, yes, That is also true, but modern slavery, like the current practice of slavery, that started uh, in 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 uh, in Europe. Slavery started actually in the late Middle Ages.
So everybody, our discussion section that lasted for 10 minutes just ended. Now we are heading over to the debate section, which will last for a total of 15 minutes, and why each person will get a total of 7 minutes, 7.5 minutes to speak their opinions on feudalism. To start with the debate, to you, Mr. Shrestha, I would like to ask a question. What was feudalism an effective system of was feudalism an effective system in the ancient in the Middle Ages of Europe?
Thank you, Mr. Vivian. I think that feudalism was not an effective solution to the instability of post-Roman Europe. Let me present myself. Feudalism perpetuated political fragmentation rather than providing unity. That means it actually broke down the nation into many parts rather than uniting the nation together, which was bad to a decentralized and broken down and fragmented Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire. Lack of central authority. After the fall of the Roman Empire, Europe experienced a lack of centralized government, but instead of providing a cohesive system of government, feudalism fractured political power. It decentralized authority, leaving the king with very little control over local lords who ruled large areas autonomously. This actually broke down the unity of Europe after the fall of the Roman Empire. Thank you. Do you have anything to say, Mr. Will?
While I do agree with most of what you say, I would like to share some of my opinions. I think feudalism actually saved the states from the oppression of a tyrannical king. If the king had the majority of all the power, then the power wouldn't be decentralized. In feudalism, the feudalism acted kind of like a federation, like a federal system. The power started from one point and then it decentralized into various points. I think this maintained a power balance among people. What do you think?
I have to agree with you, Mr. Vivin. That is totally correct. But understand. Here you have to understand the context of Europe at that time. Feudalism, instead of being a kind of system of governments in which the power is shared between a central and regional governments, in feudalism, the power is distributed on a system of mutual obligations, not where a system of mutual obligations based on land and military service, where local lords hold power over their territories but still subject to the overarching authority of the monarch. That means, unlike feudalism, if the in feudalism, if a regional government wants to use its local resources and its and the money available to it and its powers, then it does not have to access central government. Here, the local lords have to follow the king in order to get the land and treasure or money they want. Another point is lack of constitutional balance. In a federal state, there is usually a clear and structured balance of power between the three between the two or more levels of government, with them respecting each other's authority, autonomy, and working together. But in a feudal system, regional lords are often in conflict with the monarch, undermining any system that has coexistence. Thank you.
I couldn't agree with you more. I think you've captured this debate. I have no more points to share. So then, maybe we can head on to the next question. So,
Definitely. I have a question for you.
sure.
Do you think federalism actually stopped slash feudalism actually stopped slash reduced economic growth in Europe?
I think feudalism didn't stop economic growth in Europe. I think it actually benefited to the economic growth. Here's why. So, basics of feudalism. There's king, dukes, barons, and lords, and knights and peasants, right? Each each person that's one step ahead of them is their feudal lord, and one step below is the vassal. Now the lords and the vassals had this kind of close bond together, where the vassals had to be extremely loyal to the lord, and in exchange for land, the vassals had to work for the lord. So in that way, the lords had this incredibly loyal manpower, which they could use for greater good, such as making them work in various economic activity sectors like agriculture. They had to plow the fields and lands, required a lot of man force. The feudal lords could ask their vassals to do them for them. The vassals had to oblige. In this way, the state had a very successful manpower in its hands. And even in the case of war, the king could ask the dukes and barons to bring out their feudal army. In this way, even if the king did not have his own army by conquest, he still had a powerful feudal army which he could order to summon. So, in this way, I think that feudalism actually encouraged economic growth. Of course, there are drawbacks. Of course, not everyone's gonna use their feudal power for good, but I think it holds a significant impact in such way.
I could not agree with you more. I actually had a no stance going into this debate, going into this question, but I think your points actually completely disprove most of my points. And on looking on what happened in feudal Europe, I actually think your points and your understanding are factually and theoretically correct. Thank you.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we are moving on to the last section of this podcast, which is the conclusion section. Just 5 minutes total, 2.5 minutes for each person. Mr. Shrestha, I'd like for you to start.
Thank you, Mr. Uh, Vivin. So, I would like to first summarize my key points. Feudalism was a very effective system in the medieval context, helping to maintain order and stability in a fragmented Europe, in a broken Europe, in a post-Roman Empire Europe. Feudalism also had its drawbacks, particularly in terms of social mobility, inequality, and economic factors. First, social mobility. In the time of the Middle Ages, feudalism was a major system uh, y- used by nearly every major nation slash kingdom. Uh, it was based on a rigid social hierarchy. It had social classes, with the king at the top, the peasants at the bottom, and in this case, the people in lower levels of the social hierarchy got limited social mobility. This means, unlike modern societies where an individual may be born poor, but based on their talents and education or wealth, they might become very rich and very respected in the social classes. If a peasant is born in the system of feudalism, if a peasant is born, then they will forever remain a peasant. And another thing is inequality, because of the very distinct uh, because of the very distinct uh, distribution of classes. Feudalism actually provided a lot of room for things like slavery and uh, other such practices to arise. Feudalism did not last for very long though. Feudalism was, despite being a major system in the ancient Middle Ages of Europe, it began to break down due to factors like growth of growth of towns and the rise of a merchant class. and the centralization of monarchies, where monarchies, instead of being distributed into many classes of power, got centralized into one central power
Music
source.
licensing reimagined.
And the structure of feudalism provided a fundamental foundation for future political and social systems, but it also contributed to the development of more centralized nation states and the eventual shift of capitalism. That means the ancient feudalism is actually the modern capitalism.
Uh huh. Okay.
Feudalism was both a necessity and a limitation. It served its purpose during a chaotic time in history, but also laid
Artlist
the
logo.
groundwork for the inequalities, and that later drove for calls for change, such as the rise of democracy and social reform in the early period.
Feudalism was kind of like a tough pill to swallow, but it was necessary and it needed to be removed at the same time, right? So now I'll just like to discuss about a short some things
Music
that happened after
licensing
feudalism. So as
reimagined.
feudalism ended, I think the feeling of nationalism started to grow in people. So what is a nation? A nation is like a group of people that want to live together under the same government. Nationalism is that kind of feeling. So as that kind of feeling started to emerge, monarchical classes started rising up. So that was the rise of monarchy. We can also say that after feudalism, monarchy rose.
More than monarchies, I think after feudalism,
Artlist logo.
empires rose with emperors. The
Emperors.
re-rise of empires.
Okay. So instead of monarchies, it was emperors that rose. So can we say that feudalism was ground zero for the imperial system?
Music
Uh,
licensing reimagined.
then, rather than being ground zero for the imperial system, the rise of the imperial system actually led to the fall of feudalism. Any final questions? We are about to run out of time.
Yes, one very important question. How can we resonate the feudalism system to our daily lives? What can we learn from it?
I actually have an answer for
Artlist
your
IO.
question. Feudalism limited social mobility, making it hard for people to improve their status or pursue self improvement. Most individuals were born into fixed social roles. Peasants, knights, lords, and had little opportunity to move up, as they were tied to the land and local economy. While spiritual self improvement through the church was
Music
possible,
licensing
economic
reimagined.
mobility was restricted and peasants could not use skills, wealth, or education to rise in society. The rigid hierarchical system meant that social roles were inherited, making it tough for people to change their circumstances. However, as feudalism declined, new opportunities for self-improvement emerged. I think feudalism is a perfect example of society. Society stops you from growing. Society ties you down to the ground. But through
Artlist
self
IO.
improvement and fighting the distractions, you can improve and beat the society. You are beating the feudalism. Thank you.
So feudalism can serve as a symbolism of hope in our lives as well. Oftentimes, we are tied by the constraints of society, and that forces us to do what is not
Music
right. That
licensing
forces us to not
reimagined.
live in accordance with our values. We can reject that, we can choose to fight, then we can rise above ourselves. Thank you, Mr.
Yes,
Shrestha. It was a very
yes,
interesting, thought provoking, and intuitive conversation with you this Sunday.
has been remarkable. History set the basis for modern society.
Yeah. There was a quote that I really liked that I read from
Artlist IO.
Marcus Aurelius' book called Meditations. It said, look to the empires that rose and fell, and you can foresee the future too. I think it is grounded in reality, that quote.
Definitely. And I think we are running out of time, and I would like to, and I think we should end this podcast.
Music
It was very
licensing
nice meeting and
reimagined.
talking with you. I hope I can return back onto your podcast another time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shrestha. Now we shall end this podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Hope you learned a lot from this podcast. This is our first podcast, and please support us. We'll make sure to talk with more like minded people, more intelligent people. An intelligent person collaborates with a person who is more intelligent than he is. Here, Mr. Shrestha knows a lot more about history than I. So I encourage you all to talk with people
Artlist
who are more
IO.
intelligent than you as well. Face your fears of public speaking. and talk to random people. Thank you.